Welcome to Learn English with Sara, a place where stories don't just teach you English, they teach you about life courage and the journey of becoming yourself. Today, we begin an emotional, powerful transformation story, one that will guide your English improvement through feelings, imagery, and real human experience. As you listen, let the language flow naturally. Let every moment help you practice, and let every emotion help you grow. Now, let's begin the story of a young boy who would one day become a global icon, but who first had to confront fear inside the walls of his own home. Willard Carroll Smith Jr. was born on September 25th, 1968, in West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. To the world, he would later become Will Smith, actor, rapper, global superstar. But before the fame, there was simply a boy trying to survive inside a house that looked normal from outside but carried storms inside. He lived in a middle-class neighborhood, not wealthy, not poor. His mother, Caroline, worked for the school board, thoughtful and gentle. His father, Willard Sr., was a strict military man who believed discipline was the only language worth speaking. Their home was a place full of rules, quiet tension, and moments no child should witness. One moment especially changed Will forever. When he was 9 years old, he watched his father hit his mother so hard she fell to the ground. Something inside him cracked. Something inside him froze. He wrote later that he felt not only heartbroken but powerless. From that day on, he believed one thing deeply: if he could make people laugh, then maybe they wouldn't fight. If he kept everyone smiling, maybe no one would get hurt again. Entertainment became his shield, his armor, and his survival strategy. The louder his jokes were, the quieter his fear felt. Growing up, he developed a remarkable skill: he could read a room instantly. If his father came home in a bad mood, Will turned into a comedian. If his mother seemed tired or sad, he danced or sang to pull her out of it. If his friends were upset, he became a bright cartoon of himself to make them forget their troubles. To the world, he seemed cheerful, but deep inside lived a child who never felt completely safe. He believed that if he stopped performing, people would walk away or fall apart. By the time he reached his early teens, hip hop became his language of freedom. While many rappers expressed anger and struggle, Will chose humor stories about school, lighthearted adventures, even gentle romance. He refused to curse in his lyrics because he respected his grandmother too much to let her hear him speak that way. People teased him for not being hard, but Will wasn't trying to be tough. He was trying to create joy, the very thing he had always needed. At 16, he met a talented DJ named Jeff Towns, who would become DJ Jazzy Jeff. Together, they built a musical duo that blended rhythm, charm, and fun. Their chemistry was effortless, and by 1989, their work exploded into national fame. They won the first Grammy Award ever given for rap music. Will was only 20 years old. A boy who once hid fear behind jokes was suddenly standing on the biggest stage in music. Success came fast, too fast for someone who had never learned how to manage money or fame. Will spent without limits: cars, motorcycles, gadgets, fancy outfits, endless parties. He believed the flow of money would never stop. But suddenly it did. Album sales dropped. Calls stopped coming. Then came a letter from the Internal Revenue Service informing him he owed more than $2 million in unpaid taxes. Almost everything he owned was taken. At 25, he was broke, embarrassed, and living on his girlfriend's couch, convinced his career was over. But life often opens a new door in the darkest moments. A friend told him about auditions for a new television show called The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will insisted he wasn't an actor, but his friend answered simply, "You weren't a rapper either until you became one." With nothing to lose, Will attended the audition. His natural charm filled the room, and before he had time to doubt himself, he was offered the leading role. That single decision became the bridge from his broken past to a future no one could have predicted. When the show debuted in 1990, millions of viewers instantly embraced him. They laughed at his jokes, memorized his theme song, and welcomed him into their living rooms every week. But behind every laugh he delivered, there was still a boy trying to prove he deserved love. Behind every smile, there was a man afraid that if he stopped being perfect, everyone would leave. Only one episode would reveal the truth, an emotional moment where Will confronts the pain of an absent father. His tears were real, not scripted. For the first time, the mask slipped, and the world saw the boy behind the performer. As his fame grew, Will began building a new dream. He no longer wanted to be the funny kid from Philadelphia or the rising artist trying to prove himself. He wanted something far bigger, something almost unimaginable at the time. He decided he would become the biggest movie star in the world. He didn't say it as a fantasy, but as a mission. He studied the industry with the same intensity he once used to read the moods inside his childhood home. He analyzed box office patterns, learned what kinds of stories audiences loved and observed, which actors connected most deeply with viewers. He wanted to understand not only what made a film successful, but what made people feel something powerful. His transformation happened quickly. Within a few years, he appeared in action, comedies, science fiction blockbusters, heartfelt dramas, and powerful thrillers. Each time, he brought a spark of humanity that made audiences root for him. Movies like Bad Boys in 1995, Independence Day in 1996, and Men in Black in 1997 turned him into a global phenomenon. Behind the scenes, though, he worked harder than anyone. He trained relentlessly, memorized scripts obsessively, and pushed himself with a kind of hunger that came from a place deeper than ambition. He wasn't running toward the spotlight. He was running away from the shadow inside him. But the role that touched millions the most came years later in 2006 with The Pursuit of Happiness. Will played Chris Gardner, a struggling father trying to protect his young son while fighting homelessness. The story broke hearts everywhere, not only because of the film's message, but because Will wasn't simply acting. He was revealing pieces of his own childhood, his own fears, his own longing for safety and love. When he spoke the famous line, "Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something, not even me," it wasn't just a father speaking to a son. It was the adult Will speaking to the 9-year-old boy still living in his memory, telling him he didn't need to be afraid anymore. As his career soared, Will achieved everything he once believed would fill the emptiness inside him. He earned respect, fame, admiration, and wealth. But something was still missing. Even with global success and the admiration of millions, he often felt as though he were still performing, still wearing the smile of a man who didn't allow himself to stop moving. Behind the awards and the applause, he felt pressure to be perfect. And perfection, he would later discover, was the biggest prison of all. One place where the cracks quietly showed was in his marriage. Will had married Jada Pinkett Smith, a talented actress with a strong sense of independence. Their love story was powerful but also complex. They had moments of joy and unity, but they also experienced deep misunderstandings. Will wanted to create a beautiful traditional family, a vision shaped by everything he felt he lacked as a child. Jada, meanwhile, valued freedom and authenticity and sometimes felt suffocated by expectations not because she didn't love Will, but because she needed space to understand herself. Their differences became painfully clear on Jada's 40th birthday. Will spent 3 years planning an unforgettable celebration, complete with a documentary, special guests, and a massive event designed to honor her. But when the celebration ended, Jada told him something he never expected. She said, "This was not for me. This was for you." Her words pierced him more deeply than any criticism he had faced from the public. He realized that he had given everything from a place of performance, hoping to create a perfect moment when all she wanted was something sincere and simple. That night, he said he retired from trying to make people happy. The distance between them grew. They didn't announce a separation, they didn't divorce. They simply drifted into silence, sharing a home, yet living emotionally apart. Years later, when Jada spoke publicly about a relationship she had during their break, the world reacted with shock and criticism. Will sat across from her on camera, trying to understand, trying to breathe, trying not to fall apart in front of millions. The internet made jokes and memes, but behind the screen, a man was confronting one of the most painful truths of his life, that love cannot survive when two people wear masks for too long. The emotional storm of their relationship reached another breaking point in 2022 at the Academy Awards. A joke about Jada led Will to walk on stage and strike the comedian Chris Rock. The world froze. In seconds, his reputation built over decades seemed to shatter. People everywhere questioned who he truly was. But while the world debated, Will sat alone in the aftermath, asking himself questions he had avoided for decades. Why did he react that way? What pain was he carrying that erupted so suddenly? Why had he spent so many years pretending to be untouched by fear or sorrow? That moment, though disastrous, became the beginning of his deep internal transformation. He apologized publicly, but more importantly, he apologized to himself. He said later that the hardest journey he ever took was forgiving the parts of himself he had ignored since childhood. It wasn't fame he wanted, it wasn't applause, it was peace. After the Oscars, Will disappeared from the public eye. He stopped giving interviews, stopped appearing on red carpets, and stopped performing for the world. For the first time in decades, he chose silence. It was uncomfortable at first, like stepping into a dark room with no idea what was hiding inside. But slowly, the silence became a mirror. He began to face emotions he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Fear, shame, anger, regret, each one rose to the surface, demanding to be seen. He spent long days at home meditating, writing in journals, speaking to spiritual teachers, and learning how to sit with himself. He said he had built his entire life on the belief that love must be earned through achievement, humor, perfection, and control. But the silence was teaching him something new. Love wasn't something he had to earn. It was something he had been running away from without realizing it. Without cameras or expectations, he finally allowed himself to feel. He cried for the 9-year-old boy who felt helpless. He cried for the teenager who used humor to hide pain. He cried for the young man who chased fame to escape his own heart. And he cried for the adult who finally realized how tired he was from performing every day of his life. Through these tears, something inside him softened. For the first time, he wasn't trying to fix or impress anyone. He was simply trying to understand himself. His marriage with Jada was also entering a new phase, one built not on performance, but on honesty. They had spent years trying to be the perfect couple, trying to protect their image, trying to live up to everyone's expectations. But perfection had only created pressure and distance. Now they were learning to speak truthfully, even when it was uncomfortable. They were learning to stop trying to control each other and instead learn from one another. Jada once said, "We are partners, not prisoners." That became the foundation for their new connection. Will stopped trying to be the hero who solved every problem. Jada stopped trying to hide behind silence. They gave each other space to grow, space to breathe, and space to heal. Their relationship was still complex, still imperfect, but now it was real. And real, they discovered, was better than perfect. During this period, Will also looked closely at his role as a father. For years, he believed a good father was someone who guided, pushed, motivated, and protected. But his children, Jaden, Willow, and Trey, helped him see fatherhood in a new light. Each of them was already on a unique journey, full of talent, curiosity, and emotional depth. They didn't need a perfect father. They just needed one who could listen. One day, Willow looked at him and said, "Dad, I don't need you to fix everything. I just need you to see me." Those words struck him more powerfully than any moment on stage or screen. He realized that presence mattered more than perfection. Listening mattered more than guiding, and love at its deepest level was simply about understanding someone without trying to control their path. Little by little, Will began to rebuild his identity, not as a superstar, not as the Fresh Prince, not as a man hiding behind a smile, but as a human being learning how to exist without fear. He traveled to quiet places far from the noise of Hollywood. He read books that challenged his beliefs. He spoke to monks, healers, teachers, and friends who taught him the value of vulnerability. Instead of searching for answers outside himself, he turned inward. His journals filled with reflections, sometimes pages of raw emotion, sometimes only a single word. One evening, he wrote a question that changed everything. If I died tomorrow, who was I really? The answer came gently. He realized he wasn't the image the world adored, nor the mistakes he made, nor the expectations he had tried to meet. He was a man who had spent his entire life trying to be strong when real strength was the courage to let go of the mask. When he finally decided to return to the public eye, his voice had changed. It was calmer, slower, and softer. He wasn't trying to entertain. He wasn't trying to win admiration. He wasn't trying to escape. He was simply speaking from a place of truth. In one of his first reflections, he said, "I thought success was noise, but real success is peace." His children noticed the difference. His friends noticed it. Even his fans watching from afar could feel that something profound had shifted. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't chasing admiration. He was learning how to be whole. And in that process, he discovered something deeper than fame: freedom. Freedom from perfection, freedom from fear, freedom from the need to perform. He realized that life becomes lighter when you stop trying to be the best version of yourself for the world and start becoming the truest version of yourself for your soul. As the months passed, Will stepped into a quieter, more grounded chapter of his life. He no longer woke up thinking about headlines, box office numbers, or global fame. Instead, he focused on something far more intimate: his daily sense of peace. It was the first time he stopped running. Without the constant noise of career pressure, he could hear himself clearly, as though his heart had been whispering all these years, but only now had space to speak. He began to take walks alone sometimes in the early morning when the world was still half asleep. Instead of planning the next big achievement, he simply watched the sky change colors, listened to his breath, and allowed himself to feel present. For a man who had lived decades in the spotlight, stillness felt like a new kind of success. Peace was no longer something he chased, it was something he practiced. He slowly returned to creativity, but this time with intention rather than ambition. He wasn't trying to be the biggest movie star anymore. He didn't care about being number one. What he wanted were stories that mattered, stories that reflected truth instead of perfection. Each script he read, each idea he explored, he asked himself a simple question. Does this help someone else heal the way I'm healing? If the answer was no, he moved on without hesitation. His understanding of love also began to deepen. He realized that real love doesn't demand performance. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It doesn't keep score or hide behind expectations. Real love is quiet, patient, honest. It grows in uncomfortable conversations, in small acts of listening, and in the courage to let another person be who they truly are. It exists not because you earn it, but because you allow it. He understood this more clearly when he revisited his relationship with his father in his memories. His father had been strict, intense, and sometimes terrifying. Yet he also taught Will discipline, responsibility, and resilience. When his father grew ill and neared the end of his life, Will stayed by his side, not out of duty or guilt, but out of a desire to understand the man who had shaped him so profoundly. He fed him, talked to him, held his hand, and allowed himself to see him not as a giant full of anger, but as a human being with wounds of his own. Forgiveness didn't erase the pain, but it released the weight. Will learned that forgiveness is not for the person who hurt you. It is for the person you are becoming. The more he healed, the more he recognized that authenticity was the greatest freedom he could ever claim. He no longer wanted to be the strongest man in the room. He wanted to be the most honest. He no longer wanted applause. He wanted connection. Instead of presenting a perfect, unbreakable image to the world, he began to show vulnerability. He shared his reflections openly, his fears, his mistakes, his lessons, not to gain sympathy, but to offer others a path out of their own shadows. He admitted that the version of himself he showed the world for most of his life had been a shield. The jokes, the charm, the confidence, all of it was crafted to protect the frightened child who believed he wasn't worthy unless he kept everyone happy. But now, as a grown man, he realized he didn't have to protect that child anymore. He could finally give him the safety he never had. And in doing so, he could give himself the peace he had always longed for. When he looked at his career, his relationships, and his identity, he saw that everything he once believed was strength had been a disguise. Real strength, he discovered, was admitting, when you are wrong, choosing humility over pride, choosing compassion over ego, and choosing truth over performance. It was the strength to look in the mirror without fear and accept the person staring back. He shared these revelations with his children, not as lessons, but as conversations. They no longer saw him as a superhero father, but as a human being learning, stumbling, and growing just like they were. Their relationships became softer, warmer, more real. Willow once told him she could finally breathe around him because she no longer felt like she had to live up to his expectations. Jaden felt free to explore life on his own terms. And Trey felt seen in a way he hadn't for years. Will realized then that letting go of perfection had opened the door for love to flow more naturally. As he continued to heal, his understanding of success changed completely. Success was no longer a number, a trophy, or a headline. Success was waking up without anxiety. Success was sitting with someone you love and listening without judgment. Success was laughing without needing to hide pain behind the sound. Success was the quiet strength of knowing you are enough just as you are. He began to share these truths through interviews, videos, and personal reflections, not as a celebrity speaking from a stage, but as a human being inviting others into a more honest version of life. And people around the world responded. His vulnerability didn't make him weaker, it made him more relatable, more inspiring, more real. Through all this, Will learned the most powerful lesson of his life. You don't grow by becoming who the world wants you to be. You grow by removing everything that isn't truly you. As Will stepped deeper into this new way of living, he realized that the journey he was on was not about rebuilding the superstar image he once had. It was about rebuilding the man beneath it. He no longer felt the need to pretend that he was unbreakable. He accepted the truth that every human being carries both light and shadows, and that true growth begins the moment you stop hiding either one. His story had moved far beyond fame, beyond mistakes, beyond expectations. It had become a story of returning home to himself. He spent more time in nature, feeling the softness of grass under his feet and listening to the rhythm of the wind. There was something healing in the simplicity of being part of a world that did not care about his reputation or his past. Standing beneath towering trees or beside quiet rivers, he felt small in the best way possible, like a person who finally understood his place in the world. He didn't have to shine brighter than everyone else. He only had to shine honestly. He returned to acting slowly, choosing roles that resonated with truth rather than spectacle. He wanted to tell stories that carried meaning, stories that allowed him to express emotions he once buried deep. Acting no longer felt like performance, it felt like reflection, a way to connect with others through vulnerability instead of charm. When he stepped onto a film set again, he did so with a heart that wasn't searching for approval. He was searching for authenticity. His relationships continued to evolve as he did. With Jada, the connection grew more grounded. They were no longer trying to preserve an image of the perfect couple. Instead, they were learning to walk beside each other without forcing the other into a shape they didn't fit. They began to talk openly without fear of judgment or rejection, and discovered that honesty, raw and unpolished, created more closeness than perfection ever could. Their journey was not traditional, not flawless, but it was real, and real they agreed was enough. He also became more gentle with himself. Instead of pushing through exhaustion, he allowed himself to rest. Instead of ignoring difficult emotions, he sat with them and listened. Instead of chasing admiration, he cultivated gratitude. He realized that all the achievements he once believed defined him were simply chapters, not the whole story. The real story was the one happening inside, deep, quiet, and transformative. The more he embraced vulnerability, the more people saw him clearly. They didn't just see a movie star. They saw a man learning to forgive, to understand, to grow, and to let go. And in witnessing his journey, many found the courage to face their own hidden battles. Will understood then that the most powerful impact a person can make is not through perfection, but through truth. When people see someone rise after falling, heal after breaking, and keep walking after being lost, they feel less alone. He once thought he needed the world's love to feel whole. but now he understood something far more profound. The love that truly heals is the love you offer yourself, not the love you earn, not the love you chase, but the love you uncover when you stop pretending. For the first time in his life, he looked at himself without a mask and felt compassion instead of criticism. His story became a reminder that pain is not a dead end, it is a doorway. Falling is not failure, it is a lesson. And breaking is not the end, it is the beginning of becoming someone wiser, softer, and more real. He had spent years performing a version of himself he thought the world wanted. Now he chose to live as the person he truly was. And in that choice, he found peace. Not the kind that comes from applause or success, but the quiet peace that settles in the heart when you finally tell the truth. When you accept your past without letting it control you. When you stop chasing love and start living it. When you stop performing and finally breathe. His journey, full of fear, fame, mistakes, and redemption, became a testament to the power of authenticity. He learned that being human means being imperfect, being strong means being honest, and being free means letting go. And now, as this story comes to an end, there is one message left, one that Will's journey teaches gently but unmistakably. You can rewrite your story anytime. You can fall and rise. You can hurt and heal. You can lose yourself and find your way back. What matters is not who you were, but who you choose to become next. Thank you for listening to this emotional and transformative story. If it touched your heart, if it helped your English grow, or if it helped you see your own life more clearly, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment about what part of the journey moved you the most. Your voice matters here, and your story matters too.